Well, thank you. And probably what you're going to hear is kind of this, what you've heard biggest part of the morning. I don't think we're absolutely unique in what we did, and we kind of tried to follow the script that CCA laid out for us, but we did not have any of the 9 colleges, and we're a very small state. The largest college we have is a little over 5,000 students, so we have 9 colleges, very small. But none of those 9 were addressing developmental education. So we did not have a particular leader in our state that was moving forward like some of you have had. So we started looking at it from the state level through my office. And of course, we looked at the data like you're supposed to do, and we did. And like most of you, it's pretty ugly. So we shared that data with the presidents. And don't ever assume that they know what is happening with their developmental education students, because of the 9 presidents, I'd say the most of them were not aware of that. Probably only 13% of their students were graduating that entered through developmental. So we decided to address this at a state level. We figured only 9 colleges, we could herd 9 different cats. We had to reevaluate that, but. So once we got the president's jaws off the table, we decided that we would put together a developmental education task force that included presidents, included chief academic officers, and included faculty, both developmental and college level English and math. And we looked at what we need to do. We looked at different models. We looked at policies. And so they did things like put together curriculum and those type of things. But at some point, we decided that probably coreqs were the best model to follow. We went to the meeting in Indiana, in Indianapolis, that CCA had. And during that meeting, I think we had one of our college presidents with us, which fortunately is one of the good ones that back us on most things we do. So at that meeting, we decided that, well, we're going 100% coreqs, and we're going to do that in fall 2014. Well, that got some attention from the other presidents when we came back and told them that. But what that did is, we've been talking about this, and we've been looking at these different models, but we actually put a time frame on it, and that we were serious about it. So we wanted to move this way. Now, not all of them made it. We knew they would not. But we did put the challenge out there and put a time frame on it. And then the next probably most important thing that we did is that we had CCA to come in and do one of their state level academies. And I've had college presidents tell me after that that was probably the most important thing that we did. We got all of them together, and all the presidents were there, chief academic officers, faculty, and different folks in the college, fairly large group. And during that process, they heard the gospel from CCA, and then we asked them to put together an initial plan of how they were going to move forward with reforming developmental education and do the coreqs. I think a couple of those plans blew out the car windows on the way home, but we had to get those colleges back in line. And we still have some work to do, and you'll see in a minute from Sarah where we are. And I can tell you that not everybody jumped in head first. Few put their toes in the water, tested it. But the key, and if you're going to address this on the state level, and you haven't done that yet, and this came up earlier, you heard it from Mike McComas, one of our faculty members at Mount West, you have to have I don't know if commitment's a strong enough word, but you certainly have to have the commitment of the president that they say that they were going to do it. We can say at the college or at the state level, yeah, we're going to go 100% coreqs. We're a coordinating board. We're not a board, a governing board, so we can't just say absolutely we're going to do it, nothing else. Although a few times I did feel pretty good. I've heard people say, well, the chancellor said we had to do this. So some places it did work, that they thought that they absolutely had to do it. But you got to get those key leaders on campus. You got to sell them and sell them and sell them and get them committed to it. And then they, in turn, they work down through the system. Everybody talked about getting everybody on campus involved. So, but you got to start with that president and get them committed to it, and the chief academic officers. It absolutely will not go anywhere. But when we looked at this thing, bottom line, what it all boils down to is that if we have somewhere around 65% of our students coming into our community colleges that need developmental education, and only 13% of those students can graduate, and I harp on this all the time, your college has no chance to be successful. Because how many are students coming in, that's the only, you have no chance. But in the bigger picture, you are shutting out a whole group of individuals that will have no opportunity to move into the high-wage, high-skill jobs. And that impacts the economic development of your state. If we're not successful to this group of students, we are not going to have enough people to fill the high-skill, high-wage jobs that's going to be available. You hear that all the time. When companies look at states, where they're going to locate or where they're going to expand, the skilled workforce is right at the top of the list. And if we don't get these folks through, get them skilled in whatever they want to do, then it's going to impact the whole economic development of the state. I don't know if the folks at the college level ever think about that, but I know all of the chancellors and state level people in here, how much pressure we get on economic development, skilled workforce in our state. And so that's something that you need to try to make the local colleges understand. It's not just that campus, it's your whole state. And that's our job at state level, make sure they don't forget it. So I think if we're successful, we keep pushing, we keep it on the radar screen. Because when you go to campus, sometimes things get in the way, and these initiatives from the state, you push them aside. So we try to keep it in front of them all the time, how important it is, and we've continued to do that. So I think that's been some of the success that we've had.
Great, thank you, Chancellor. Sarah, so you've made this commitment, you jumped in with both feet. Tell us
We did.
what you've done.
So I want to, just a point of clarity, if some of you were looking at that 13% graduation rate of DevEd students and going, wow, that's great, how can they graduate 13% of DevEd students in 2 years? This is a 6-year graduation rate, 6 years. So all the data you're going to see today is going to compare 2011 to 2014. 2011, we're considering our base year. We started changing DevEd in 2012. That's when we started working on this. So every piece of data that you're going to see that's a pre versus post is going to be 2011. In 2011, none of our students were in coreq courses who were in developmental ed. In 2014, 41% of our students who required developmental English were in coreq courses. Now here's something interesting. We issued the challenge, 100% of students coreq courses. I thought that most of the institutions would push the English. They would push going to coreq in English. That's not what happened. They pushed coreq in math because the larger problem was in math. So I'm going to show English first, but these numbers are going to be a lot smaller than what you're going to see in math. So we have 41% of our students in coreq English. Peter, you asked whether or not anyone's gone 100%, no floor, no ceiling. Bridge Valley has. So if you look at our traditional model, fall 2011, gateway success after 2 years. These are students who started in developmental ed, developmental English specifically in this chart, and after 2 years, they completed some form of college-level English. So take Bridge Valley as an example. 43% of students after 2 years completed developmental English, or completed college-level English. After they implemented the coreq model, and in this case, Bridge Valley implemented what we refer to as an ALP-ish model, 72% of the developmental English students are finishing after 1 semester. WVU at Parkersburg has a model that's very similar to Baltimore County. They have a floor, albeit a very low floor. The vast majority of their students are in a coreq course. They went from 34% completion after 2 years to 66% in 1 semester. And you can see these numbers are consistent across the board. I will say for those institutions where you are seeing NAs, that does not necessarily mean that they did not implement some reform. The challenge that we presented to the institutions was to have their students finishing college-level English or math after 1 year. Our preference was within a one-semester model, and I think ultimately the data will bear that out. But institutions interpreted that in a variety of ways. And so some of these institutions have a linked model. Southern West Virginia Community and Technical College, which you'll see their data here for math in a second, they had never implemented a coreq model, not a pilot, not a single model. So in the fall of 2014, they went all in math. In the fall of 2015, they're going to go all in English, no floor, no ceiling. But you can see our system-wide results. After 2 years in 2011, students who needed developmental English, 37% completed their college-level English course in 2 years. In 2014, 68% completed in 1 semester. Developmental math. 2011, we had 0 coreq courses. 2014, 70% of our developmental ed students are in a coreq developmental math course. These are where the numbers are really huge. Bridge Valley, all in, no floor, no ceiling. Mount West, all in, no floor, no ceiling. Southern, all in, no floor, no ceiling. WVU Parkersburg, again, a very low floor. Everybody else is in. Blue Ridge, who has an NA here, but they've actually recently given me their data, they have a 69% completion rate. They had a ceiling. Everybody was in but the ceiling, and the ceiling was just for their STEM majors. So Blue Ridge isn't in here right now, but you can see that in our math courses, after 2 years in 2011, we had a 14% college math completion rate. In 2014, after 1 semester, we have a 62% completion rate. I'm a data geek. I love data. I've never seen changes like this in higher ed in my life. Never. These are huge, dramatic changes that will make a difference to our students. One of the greatest things that I heard this semester was when I was talking to a faculty member, a technical faculty member at Southern West Virginia Community and Technical College. And he was telling me that his program had historically had really low retention rates, but this semester his retention rates were through the roof. Now, we've just been given a $25 million TAC grant, so I'm thinking he's going to tell me about our peer coaching, he's going to tell me about the accelerated program, he's going to tell me about all these things. I said, so what do you attribute that change to? He said, oh, our coreq math. It's made all the difference in my program. This is somebody who is not a math instructor. This is somebody who has nothing to do with developmental ed. This is just a technical program faculty member. And he's already identifying, after 1 semester of change, that his retention rates have gone through the roof. So we really believe strongly in this model. We really believe that it has the opportunity to move our state and our students forward.
Because this morning I talked quite briefly about this movement to the learning support model, but the movement to that learning support model took an enormous amount of effort and an enormous amount of work really across an entire state to do that, and that work was not in any way insignificant or not impactful. It really was. And it sort of echoes work that lots of other people were doing across the state at the time. I was back in Mississippi when a lot of that work was being done, and I was doing that at Ole Miss. And a lot of that work was really, it really was the case that we prided ourselves about saying when students come out of remediation and go into credit-bearing work, that the grade distribution of those students who are prepared in that way is indistinguishable from the students who went straight in. Right? That used to at one point be a gold standard. But the reality is that 70% of 70% is still 49%. It was then, it is now. And that recognition is an enormous game changer. And so what we had to do was to have some very detailed conversations with people who had committed themselves to this work. They were committed not to the model, but committed to helping many, many more students who came in needing remediation succeed in those gateway classes. They understood what the stakes were. The thing that was sobering was the data that I showed you when I sat up here last, the fact that on the flip side of all of that, it was the case that we now were having many more students who completed remediation, but we still had a very small proportion of students who were completing the gateway class. So after all of that work, it was still the case that only 12% of our students were completing a Gateway Math class, and only 30% of students were completing a Gateway English class. And what's more, you could look in the data and see what was going on. That it was the case that once those students actually reached the credit-bearing class, they did very well. It's just not many of them did. It's just not many of them did. So it had to be the case that we had to have a conversation on both ends of the spectrum. It was crucial to get support from the Chancellor, support from other Vice Chancellors at TBR, and Warren Nichols, Vice Chancellor for Community Colleges, is here, and his support has been instrumental in getting us where it is that we are right now. But it's also the case, support of presidents and academic officers and deans, largely because it really is the case that priorities get funded, right? And it will require support and resources and infrastructure on campuses to make these kinds of changes. But it's also the case that we needed the support of the faculty on the ground who are actually going to be in the classrooms doing the work, and to make sure that they understood that we were not saying that what they'd just been doing with the last 20 years of their life was completely worthless. It is the case when you look into the data that the kind of remediation we're talking about today, it really is effective. When you can look inside our data and see that students really do significantly gain from having that extra support. We are not saying enroll them in the credit-bearing class and just say good luck to you. That's not what we're saying. But it is the case that the full impact of that remediation is really felt when they are in that credit-bearing class and have that support in parallel with that credit-bearing class, not in a first this, then that kind of model. That having the first this, then that creates this sort of dissipation of the effect, and we just lose all of the power of the remediation that we create. So it was about having that significant conversation, and really it was about showing the data to those who were going to be involved in the work, to understand that if we want, and at least in our state, the governor has set out a target of what we call Drive to 55, that in 2025, 55% of our adult population will have a post-secondary credential. If we want to get there, well, if 2/3 of our students are coming into community colleges and universities needing remediation, but only 10% of them are getting through a credit-bearing math class, you do the math, right? You don't need college algebra to do that, right? It's relatively easy. So the real punch for us was about saying, well, look, we have this data, and as it happens, back a few years ago, the legislature actually introduced statute to say at our universities they could not have standalone remediation. They couldn't have developmental math classes, couldn't have developmental English classes. So we had data to show what happens when you take students who have relatively low ACT scores and put them into credit-bearing classes. What we had to sort of overcome was our students aren't like that phenomenon. Has anybody ever heard that? Our students are different? Well, and it's not unrealistic to imagine just saying, well, look, let's just compare university students to community college students as a sort of a group. Well, of course, their whole ACT score distribution is different. These are different populations of students sometimes. And so just to sort of do it on a course level, course in the sense of a gross group, this wasn't going to work. That's the reason why we wanted to go to this level of disaggregating in the way that we did. And so that was really the fruit of, we did this back in January of 2014, started working with campus leaders and groups of faculty to understand, look, this is what it is that we're trying to do, and then created these pilots in the fall. And really the reason why we created those pilots in the fall was to finally put to bed we're not sure that this can work in the community college setting issue. So it is now the case. And I think you've heard, we're not unique in this, that there's plenty of work today to show that this is not a institutional flavor kind of issue. This is not a different kinds of students kind of issue. This is about a structural issue. This is simply about the fact that first this, then that means you multiply those proportions together. So you can see that at every ACT score, it really is the case that those students did remarkably better. And yes, I included that 71% in there. There aren't that many students who are in that group, but there's plenty to say that it's significantly more than the 2.7% that we had before. Same was true in English. what I want to do is to kind of unpack a little bit more to see, well, was that in any way surprising? So I said to you that we had data from the university setting. This is the data from the university setting. So we're comparing students who have ACT scores, same sub-scores in the university and community college setting. What proportions of them then within an academic year would pass a credit-bearing math class? And you can see that the pilot, which is in the red, is very, very similar to the university data, which was in the green. There's 15,000 students who are in the green bars, and roughly 700 students who are in the red bars. Now 1,000 actually, now that we have the spring data, which is very much the same, so you could think of it that way. Same is true for the writing, that we got exactly what it was that we were expecting to get, hoping to get, but if you expect it to happen, it'll happen more often, right, than if you hope. So it isn't, I don't want you to go away thinking, okay, in Tennessee, they tried it and they just got lucky. They did in West Virginia, they just got, it is better to be lucky than good, but this was not luck. We got precisely what we were expecting to get. And this is what there's no reason why it shouldn't be the case for you too. Last I'll show is, we've talked a lot about the affective side of this. I want you to think about what happens when a student comes. We have lots of first-generation students who are involved in this endeavor, right? Many of them have fought hard to get to sit down on the first day of classes. They sit down with an advisor, and that advisor says, look, I don't think you're ready for college-level work. What do they think? They think, well, I wasn't sure I was ready for college-level work either. I mean, we agree on something. And hey, presto, that student now is unsure whether they belong, and they don't stick around very long either. Does that echo with you? That echoes in our data. Look at this chart's now showing, so the blue bars, the green bars are still the same. That same data you've seen. The blue are the proportion of students who in the previous iteration completed the remediation experience in an entire academic year. Right? So if you thought to yourself, well, we just didn't give them long enough, the proportion who complete the remediation even in a full academic year, you can see again at every ACT score, it's way, way lower than the proportion who completed the credit-bearing class in a single semester. Same is true in the writing world. Same is true in the writing world, that a smaller proportion even complete the remediation than complete that credit-bearing class in a single semester. So the data really speaks. When we presented this, and we did, we went back again to the groups of faculty. We had three what we called corequisite academies, where we had faculty leadership teams in each discipline who came from every institution, university and community college. We brought them back in to show them what was really cool was they knew their own data from the pilots they did on their campuses, but they didn't see what had happened when we'd wrapped it all together. And when you wrap it all together, it is astoundingly compelling. Astoundingly compelling. So we're now in a position to tool up. So this coming fall, every institution in all of the sections of math, reading, and then math and writing. And then in reading, schools are pairing the reading remediation up with a variety of credit-bearing classes. Many, it's a freshman success class, a first-year seminar class. But it's also, many of them are using a freshman writing class, many using a freshman history class, and a couple are using freshman psych or political science. But the idea is, again, to use this idea of saying, you're not learning these reading skills just, because they might be handy one day. You're going to use them right now to read that history text that you need for for what you're doing right now. Yeah.
Thank you. So William, so there's this guy with the bow tie comes over to you and starts saying, we're going to be doing this. After all the hard work you've already done on these issues, talk to me a bit about sort of when presented with this from a campus point of view, how you responded and why it was something that you actually were willing to take on.
Well, first of all, I want to say I 100% believe in this program and in the corequisite model. However, the devil's in the details, isn't it? When you're the guy or the gal that has to go down there and make it work. And it's not easy to make it work. As you know, faculty very often are opposed to change. Why? Because when you say something about change, you're implying that they're not doing a good job. And one of the things that you have to do is really sit down with the faculty. You just can't mandate it from above. You have to have the long, difficult discussions with the faculty. That's key. And one of the things that I told them was, I'm not saying that you failed. We've done pretty well. We deal with a lot of first-generation students in East Tennessee. Maybe what's failed is not your teaching, not what you do in the classroom, but what has failed is maybe the way the courses are set up and what you have to deal with. Because if you think about it, the data is really clear about how long it takes students to get through college. And our students are not from wealthy families. They're first-time generation, and the longer it takes, the risk increases each semester, as you saw with the data. Now, when I say about the details, you really have to, once you get the faculty on your side, and I don't mean to minimize that, because I think a lot of administrators like to minimize the work that has to go into getting the faculty buy-in. You can talk about data, you can talk about the is-ought universe, but you've got to convince other human beings to change. And it takes work, it takes sweat, and you just can't force them. I'm one of these high D people. I'll trample you if you get my way. That's not the way you sell it, okay? What you need to do is have the conversation, as I mentioned. Once you move from there, you have to then deal with logistics. And I'm talking now faculty. Every one of you in here knows about how many adjunct faculty we have. At our school, which I don't think is untypical at all, 50% of my members of my department, my English department, are adjunct faculty, and then I have the full-time. And I also have up in East Tennessee limitations on credentialing. I'm not in a place where MAs in English who want to work for nothing grow on trees. It doesn't happen. We've got a lot of trees, by the way, okay? It doesn't happen. So you have to set up a model that will work where I can use MAs to teach the collegiate level and use the BAs to teach the developmental level. And then you have to figure out a way to set up the team, and you have to figure out a way to make sure that those courses work hand in hand. And I'm a big believer in keeping it simple. I'll give you an idea how we made sure they'd be working together on these classes. We told the students in the 0870, which is our developmental class, that their English 1010 teacher wouldn't read their papers unless they had them signed off by the faculty member in the 0870. So with our corequisite model, they work hand in hand. And here's where you do have to have some control. You cannot let people wander off the reservation with all kinds of syllabi. You really have to control the syllabi, and the syllabi in the developmental has to support the English 1010 assignment specifically. You cannot just have some esoteric work. Students need to see clearly that what they're doing is leading toward their success in the 1010 class. Students, the modern students, do not do free. We all know that, okay? They have to pragmatically see how it's going to benefit them. Now, one of the things that happened in our model, we use a little different model than Peter does at Baltimore. We use a cohort model, and we do it for various reasons because of how hard it is to get different people in, and also, frankly, my vice president wouldn't let me do a 10-person class. Money's money. You know, they say love makes the world go around. Well, money sure makes it spin around, doesn't it? Think about it. So I have to have 20 in each class. And that's an important factor you have to deal with in terms of the logistics. And so, to get back to what I was saying, you have to make sure that they work hand in hand in the classes.
So I want to open this up for questions in 1 second, but I just want to go back to Sarah and Jim and tell me, so you pushed these folks to move quickly, right? We had that academy in January 2014, and you were implementing by the fall. So tell me how you were able to get people that far in that amount of time.
Go ahead, Sarah.
Well, don't underestimate the clout of Jim Skidmore, who is the only chancellor. He's been the only chancellor of the community college system in the state of West Virginia, so he has a lot of clout with the presidents and with the faculty. But also, we have an unbelievable group of faculty. We have an unbelievable group of deans. We have a group of faculty and deans, as I'm sure most of you do, all of you do probably, that want their students to be successful. And when you talk them through what's happening and the fact that their students aren't being successful, they come along. They may not like it, they may not want to do it. I may have had a lot of people cussing at me behind my back, but they come along. and I think that the data has borne that out, has borne out the fact that this model works, and it helps when they see other campuses doing it and it working on other campuses. And it helps to see their peers being successful, and it pushes them to want to be more and more successful as well.
Now, I might add to that, we did some of the things that you talked about. I said early on the state level developmental education task force, we brought faculty in. I mean, we had faculty and presence in the same meeting. And so we got to discussion with the faculty members very early on, not at the campus level, at the state level. And we're very careful not to imply, and it's been mentioned a couple of times, that they were doing a poor job of instruction, because they weren't. And we didn't want to point any fingers that, who's doing poorly, or point out that it's this group of faculty. I mean, it is structural. And so we were very careful. We didn't do that, because we did not want to alienate the faculty off the bat if we came in and said, well, we're failing miserably at developmental ed, and so immediately they're going to think, well, that must be us. And but they knew that their students were passing their classes. They just didn't know what was happening to them on down the line. So we made sure that we didn't get in and start pointing fingers, and I thought that was very important early on. And we did have some colleges that were successful, and fundamentally all the colleges want to do well. And some of them have more resources, and some of them have ways of doing it better than others. But when we got into a group and you see that they're being success here, and they talk and they share those successes, I think that made a difference. And I think just the fact that we're moving all in the same direction as a system. And again, I don't want to. I want to emphasize, we only have 9 colleges. I mean, if you have 58 like North Carolina, I don't know how in the world you would get all 58 of them going in one direction. But if you had 9 of them, it's a little easier to do that. But we were moving together as a system, and they were kind of all in it together, and they were helping each other. And I think that was pretty powerful.
These things are happening in parallel, but at least the data that I showed you, the credit-bearing part of the class basically remained unchanged. It is the case that in the math side, for instance, basically it's the case that those students were now taking even I'm defaulting to college algebra, we're taking elementary statistics rather than college algebra, which certainly would have been a much larger proportion of the students who had been involved in that before. But that elementary stats class has really remained unchanged. That's work that's happening across our state now to try to actually revitalize gateway classes in general, but it isn't really the case that it isn't the case that elementary stats class that they were taking went through some large overhaul. That isn't the reason why more of them are passing the class. Does that answer your question? Yes, I mean, so it is the case that that none of those students that I showed you in that chart were taking college algebra. They were taking either elementary stats or quantitative reasoning or a discrete math class. So they were not algebra intense classes, and so that is a little change. I mean, and actually maybe more than a little change. But I think you've heard the reasons why, actually, from a mathematics perspective, that's the right way to go. It isn't the case that elementary statistics or quantitative reasoning are easier classes than college algebra. They're just different. And at least, so I'm a mathematician by trade, and I would much prefer that people learn mathematics that has some curricular relevance to what it is that they're studying. It doesn't strike me as any particular advantage to have people take stuff that doesn't have any curricular relevance in anybody's discipline. And so I can't make a good argument why it is that a psych major should be taking college algebra. If they ask me, well, when will I need this? I can't give them a good answer. And I don't think any other mathematician can either. So if it is the case that we're just, I don't believe that curricula should be some sort of weapon. It ought to have, we ought to be about student learning. And so this is about making a change for student learning, which also, as it happens, has ramifications for student success in good ways.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why it was so important that we brought up the math pathways work early and had a whole session on it, because we do feel that the differential pathways with the co-requisite, that combination, I think, is essential, right? I think that's, if you're really going to do something at scale, that's got to be part of the conversation. I don't think we're going to make
And the writing class is completely, I mean, has remained completely static.
The good news is for writing and reading, the curriculum really doesn't change.
Absolutely the same.
We teach writing as a process. Every student has a computer in a lab, and we believe, you learn writing by writing. It's just a question of degree of standards. And so the curriculum in English and reading really hasn't changed at all. It's a lot different than math.
Jim?
In the early days of the task force that I referenced earlier, they did go through a process of aligning the developmental, what the developmental outcome should be with the college level courses, which you'd hope that all been done at the campus level. We kind of did at the system level, and we did have a couple colleges that implemented a technical math pathway for the career tech programs, where they, special math just for them. So we don't know exactly what the impact of doing a technical math course or pathway as opposed to the additional help, but probably was a factor along with the additional help.
When a student comes into the community college and they test and take the Accuplace or Compass, because they can take either in the state of West Virginia, and they score below a certain cut score that's state mandated, if they score below that cut score, every single person is going into a coreq course. When I said no ceiling, what I was really referring to was in the case of Blue Ridge in mathematics, they put a ceiling for students who are going into STEM pathways. So if a student was going into a STEM pathway, they're not in the coreq courses in mathematics. They have to take a different standalone developmental ed course, and then they can go into the college level math course. And those two courses are linked during the course of the year. But when I say no floor, no ceiling, what I mean is everybody who scores below that cut score is going into a coreq course.
Thank you. Do any of you distinguish between this approach with students who want to take courses online?
So we do not. Actually, the pilot work that I showed you, pilot results did not include online classes, but we will be implementing an online version of this in the fall. So it will be an option. Yeah.
I'm a big believer in online courses. However, we believe that developmental students don't do well in online courses. It's not that we won't do it. We have not yet piloted this yet, but I would be very careful with that. They really do need a teacher. They don't work well at home. Now, there's exceptions, and those exceptions really have to do with the age of the student, the maturity level. But if you're looking at, 18 maybe through 21, 22, I would be very careful about the online at this point. But down the road, we will do it. We have 4 different sites, and typically we don't teach writing by ITV. We do have a lot of internet writing courses, and they do have a higher attrition rate, and the whole purpose of the co-requisite is to avoid the attrition. So I would be careful with that, but obviously, down the road, you're going to have online courses that fit this model.
It's really a balancing act, and I exactly echo the same, that there's lots of data, it seems, to show that this target audience probably is not well suited to online instruction without trying to build in some very careful kinds of supports. But it is the case that it's an access issue. I mean, the online instruction is a modality that opens the door to people who otherwise would not have access to this kind of education. So, do you turn around and say, no, look, if you can't come and sit in a room with me, well, then you're just not welcome to study at my place? Yeah, probably we don't want to say that. Would you say, look, it probably is the case that you would be better served if you could come to my room and study with me, but if you can't, well, then that seems to be reasonable. And so that's the spirit in which we're working with this, that online modality is an access issue. It opens the door to an audience that otherwise simply would not have access to this kind of education.
We have time for maybe one more question over here.
Thank you. I think Tennessee may have mentioned this earlier, but to what extent are your systems as systems in sustained dialogue with K through 12 educators so that appropriate remediation might more and more become part of the high school experience?
Well, we do have a sales program. Currently, it's in mathematics. I know a little bit about it because my wife's a dean of mathematics. It's been very successful. They have 5 competencies that they deal with, they're algebraic, and 95% success rate. It's done by an online program. It's very carefully monitored. It's controlled by our folks at Chattanooga State. If you're interested, you might want to contact them. Next year, I believe we're going to have English. Now imagine this is the idea behind it. You do your developmental in high school. Does that sound like the way it should be? You know, that your diploma actually means you can do collegiate level work when you leave. It's been very successful, and that's another initiative in the state of Tennessee that I'm a big believer in as well.
And this is part of an ongoing fuller conversation with the department and with the state board. That so on the one hand, as Dr. Wilson said, we have the sales program, which when it was created was largely aimed at algebra-based disciplines. So it's largely about remediating algebra. We will be working to try to see how that might aim towards quantitative reasoning and statistics in useful ways. We're developing a unified reading and writing. So those students who go through that experience in their senior year of high school will come out having satisfied the remediation in both their reading and writing. So that's a big piece. And then the other conversation we're having with K-12 is really about recognizing this sort of recognition in our state that basically degree programs fall into 3 kinds of math flavor. There are programs that require some kind of calculus. There are programs that require elementary statistics. And there are programs that are math agnostic. They think you should take math, but no. And the important recognition is the math agnostic programs is not code for college algebra. So K-12 traditionally has been sort of getting everybody ready to take college algebra. Well, that doesn't make any sense now in this new setting. So the conversation is, and it's still an ongoing conversation, but something like, if in year 4 you haven't taken Algebra 2 yet, we'll take Algebra 2. If in year 4 you have taken Algebra 2 and your ACT score says that if you're college bound but you're not college ready, well then take sales. If in year 4 you are college bound and you're bound for a degree program that is not calculus based, well then take some kind of statistics. And if you're college bound in year 4 and you're aimed for some calculus based discipline, well, let's get you ready so you can begin in calculus as a freshman in your fall semester. Now, there's a lot, the theme of today is the devil's in the details, and there's a lot of details to be hashed out there. But that's a different picture from let's get everybody ready for college algebra, which has been the picture in the past. Yeah.
So Chancellor Skidmore, we're going to end with you. Any words of wisdom that you can share with everybody? One more thing before we leave?
Just keep pushing, and just don't let it ever get off the radar screen. Just keep moving forward with it. I mean, there'll be obstacles, but just keep pushing.